Laura didn't plan for the weekend to feel heavy. But the moment she agreed to let her friend Emily's son stay over, something shifted inside her. Not fear or excitement, just a quiet sense that life was about to interrupt her careful routine. The call came late Thursday, Emily sounding rushed and worn down, explaining that a sudden work emergency would take her out of town and that 16-year-old Ethan needed a safe place to stay. And Laura said yes without thinking because that was who she had always been: dependable, steady, the friend people leaned on when plans fell apart. After hanging up, she stood alone in her kitchen, noticing the stillness she had grown used to since her divorce. It's the kind of silence that feels calm at first, but slowly turns hollow, and she wondered why her chest felt tight over something so ordinary. Ethan arrived Friday evening just before sunset, stepping out of Emily's car with a small backpack and a careful smile that felt older than his age. And Laura greeted him warmly, noticing how tall he had grown, how his eyes carried a seriousness that didn't belong to a teenager who should have been thinking about games or weekend plans. Inside the house, he took off his shoes without being asked, thanked her twice, and followed her to the guest room like he didn't want to take up too much space. And Laura sensed that this weekend wasn't about babysitting, but about sheltering. Someone who already felt pushed to the edges of his own world. They ate dinner simply, pasta and bread. It's a kind of meal that didn't demand conversation. Yet Ethan spoke politely, answering questions clearly, never too much, never too little. And Laura found herself studying the way he listened, how he nodded as if every word mattered, which made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't explain. After dinner, Ethan helped clear the table without being asked. And Laura felt a strange mix of gratitude and sadness, realizing how long it had been since someone shared her space with quiet respect. As night settled in, rain began tapping against the windows, soft at first, then steady. And Laura showed Ethan where the extra blankets were, reminding herself to keep everything normal. Simple, appropriate, because she understood boundaries even if emotions sometimes moved faster than reason. When she finally retreated to her bedroom, she didn't sleep right away. Listening to the house breathe, aware of another presence under her roof. And her thoughts drifted to her own past, 2 years spent trying to be everything for everyone. To a marriage that faded not with anger but with neglect, leaving behind a careful woman who avoided surprises. In the morning, Laura woke early out of habit, surprised to find Ethan already up, sitting at the dining table with his homework spread out. Focused and quiet, and the sight struck her harder than she expected because it felt like responsibility. Without chaos, connection, without noise. She poured coffee, exchanged a few simple words, and noticed how he relaxed just a little, like someone who didn't want to be a problem, and that realization pulled at her more than any dramatic moment could have. The hours passed quickly as Laura worked from home, typing reports while Ethan studied nearby. The shared silence comfortable but charged with unspoken stories. And Laura felt a pull not toward him, but toward the version of herself that once believed small acts of care could matter. She caught herself thinking about how many people moved through life unseen, especially those too young to explain what they carried. And she reminded herself again that her role was clear, supportive, and safe. By afternoon, the rain stopped. Light filled the room. And Laura realized she felt awake in a way she hadn't in years. Not because of excitement, but because the weekend had already asked something of her. To show up without losing herself, to open her home without opening wounds. As evening approached, she sensed that whatever this weekend held, it wouldn't be dramatic or wrong, but it would be honest. And that honesty felt like standing at the edge of something quietly important, the kind of moment you don't see coming until it's already begun. Saturday moved faster than Laura expected. the morning slipping into afternoon as if the hours didn't want to linger. And by the time she noticed the sun climbing high, the house already felt different, fuller, but not crowded, alive without being loud. Ethan spent most of the day at the dining table, focused on his assignments. Headphones resting around his neck but rarely used, and Laura worked from her laptop nearby. Both of them sharing the same space without forcing conversation, which felt surprisingly natural. Every now and then, Ethan asked a small question about a word or a problem, and Laura answered simply, careful not to sound like a teacher or a parent, just someone offering help when asked. The quiet teamwork created a rhythm, and Laura realized how long it had been since she felt useful in such an ordinary way. By late afternoon, dark clouds gathered again, rolling in quickly, and when the first thunder cracked, the lights flickered and went out, leaving the house wrapped in sudden stillness. Laura found candles in a drawer, placing them on the coffee table, their soft glow changing the room, turning it into a space that felt smaller and more honest. They sat across from each other in the living room, the storm tapping hard against the windows, and for a while neither spoke, the silence heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Ethan broke it without warning, his voice low, saying he didn't really talk to anyone about how things felt at home anymore. And Laura listened without moving, understanding that moments like this didn't ask for fixing, only for presence. Ethan spoke about school pressure, about feeling like he had to be strong all the time, about his parents being busy with their own struggles. And Laura felt a deep pull of recognition, not as someone attracted or drawn inappropriately, but as someone who knew what it meant to feel unseen. She responded carefully, choosing words that offered comfort without crossing lines, reminding him that his feelings mattered and that being quiet didn't mean being weak. The storm grew louder, rain pounding harder, and the conversation deepened. Not into forbidden territory, but into shared human experience, loneliness, expectation. And the fear of becoming invisible. Laura shared small pieces of her own past, her divorce. The way silence can feel safe until it becomes isolating. And she saw Ethan's shoulders relax, as if knowing adults could struggle to make the world feel less heavy. The power remained. Out, time stretching in a way that felt rare. And Laura noticed how easy it was to forget phones, notifications, and schedules when the moment demanded attention. Ethan admitted he often felt like a burden, moving between homes, adjusting himself to fit. And Laura corrected that gently, explaining that needing care wasn't a flaw, and that everyone at every age deserved space where they could just exist. As the storm began to fade, the lights suddenly flickered back on, breaking the moment. But something important had already settled between them. Not closeness that confused roles, but trust built on respect and clarity. They moved back into normal routines, making simple food, cleaning up together, the house returning to its usual shape. Yet Laura felt changed, aware that listening had filled a part of her that had been empty for years. That night, after Ethan went to his room, Laura sat alone on the couch, reflecting on how easily life could surprise you without breaking rules or creating chaos. And she understood that the weekend was showing her something about herself, that she could care deeply without losing boundaries, that she could connect without needing more. As she turned off the lights and headed to bed, Laura felt a quiet resolve settle in her chest, the kind that comes from realizing that some moments exist not to complicate life, but to remind you who you are when you allow yourself to be present. Sunday. Morning arrived with a quiet clarity that surprised Laura, sunlight spilling through the windows in a way that made the house feel both familiar and new. And she noticed Ethan already awake, moving around with calm purpose, preparing a simple breakfast with the focus of someone who wanted to get it right, not to impress, just to contribute. She watched him from the doorway, feeling a strange warmth that had nothing to do with romance, but everything to do with witnessing growth and effort. And she realized how little she had paused to appreciate such moments in her own life. The small, steady acts of care that often went unnoticed. They ate together at the table, and Ethan asked about small details in her routine, like how she brewed coffee or organized the counter, and Laura found herself explaining without judgment, sharing little habits that had become comforting over the years, and she noticed how attentive he was, listening as if these were lessons that mattered more than homework or weekend plans. Later, Ethan suggested going outside to move around since the sun was out. Key and Laura agreed, appreciating his thoughtfulness, and they spent the morning tidying the garden, pulling weeds, and watering plants, tasks that required teamwork without words, where each action spoke louder than conversation. And Laura felt a quiet satisfaction she hadn't realized she had been missing. As they worked, Ethan opened up more, talking about the pressure of expectations at school, the feeling of balancing friends, grades, and family. And Laura responded with empathy, sharing stories from her own past where she had felt unseen, reminding him that life didn't demand perfection and that it was okay to be human, to falter, and to ask for help when needed. And he nodded, absorbing the guidance without resistance, the weight in his shoulders lightening in small, noticeable ways. When they came back inside, Laura suggested a break, and Ethan sat quietly, reading a book he had brought along, but she noticed him glancing up from time to time, observing the house, the way she arranged small things, and it struck her how much teenagers notice without speaking, how much they internalize. And she felt a responsibility not to disappoint him, not with expectations, but with presence and care. By mid-afternoon, the house was filled with an easy energy, ordinary sounds of movement, cooking, and quiet conversation that made it feel alive in a steady, comforting way. And Laura realized that she had not just been providing a safe space for Ethan, but that in listening, guiding, and sharing, she had reconnected with a part of herself she thought had been lost. The version of her that could care freely without fear, that could teach without pressure, that could influence without control. And she understood that these lessons were mutual. The humans of any age could learn from each other if they took the time to really see one another. Later, as they sat with lemonade on the porch, watching clouds drift lazily across the sky, Ethan thanked Laura quietly. Not with dramatic gestures, but with genuine words, telling her that he felt more prepared to face the week ahead, more confident in navigating the challenges he faced, and Laura felt a deep, steady pride. The kind that comes from knowing you have mattered without compromising yourself or overstepping. That evening, Emily called, saying she would be home soon, and Laura felt the mix of relief and melancholy that always comes when meaningful moments reach their natural end. Knowing that the weekend had been more than a favor, that it had been a bridge between past and present, responsibility and growth, youth and experience. And that Ethan's presence had reminded her of the power of small gestures, of attention, of simply showing up. As the final hours passed before Emily's return, Laura reflected on the weekend's unexpected lessons, how moments of quiet care could leave lasting impressions, how boundaries could coexist with connection, and how being truly present for someone, even temporarily, could teach resilience, empathy, and self-awareness. When Ethan packed his bag and prepared to leave, he moved with quiet respect. And Laura noticed how much he had grown, not only physically but emotionally. How he had absorbed the lessons of patience, responsibility, and trust without anyone forcing him. And she felt a profound sense of completion, knowing she had offered safety and guidance without overstepping, without creating discomfort, without violating the careful lines that defined a proper, meaningful relationship between an adult and a teen. The door closed behind them, leaving Laura in a home that suddenly felt too quiet, yet richer in the memories of the small, transformative moments they had shared. And she realized that the weekend had not given her drama, excitement, or inappropriate attachment, but clarity, perspective, and a gentle reminder of the human capacity to care deeply while respecting limits. And that lesson would stay with her long after Ethan had returned to his own world, shaping the way she approached life, relationships, and her own sense of purpose. Asterisk by Sunday evening, the weekend had reached its quiet climax, and Laura felt a strange mix of relief and fulfillment as Emily's car pulled into the driveway, signaling the end of a few days that had quietly shifted something inside her. The house suddenly seeming too large and too still after being full of presence and purpose. Ethan moved efficiently, gathering his backpack and double-checking that he hadn't forgotten anything. And Laura noticed the way he paused at the door, glanced back, and offered a small but genuine smile. A gesture that carried gratitude, respect, and a sense of connection that didn't need words to be felt. Emily hurried out of the car, flustered from travel, apologizing for leaving her son behind for the weekend. And Laura reassured her with simple kindness, saying that Ethan had been easy to host, responsible, and a pleasure to be around. And in those moments, Laura felt the weight of the past few days settle into something tangible satisfaction, not from drama or excitement, but from knowing she had been part of something quietly meaningful. Ethan hugged her briefly, careful, appropriate, and sincere. And Laura felt a warmth she hadn't expected, not from romantic attraction, but from witnessing growth and trust, the kind that comes when someone feels safe enough to be themselves, even temporarily. And she realized that this weekend had reminded her of the human need for care, guidance, and attentive presence at every age. Once they left, the house returned to its usual calm. But Laura felt different, alert to a sense of possibility she hadn't felt in years. It's a kind of awareness that comes from reflecting on the impact of small, deliberate acts of kindness and the way connection can teach as much to the giver as the receiver. Sitting down in the living room, she noticed traces of the weekend Dan open notebook left on the table, a stray pen. The faint scent of coffee and meals shared in each reminder carried a story, a lesson in patience, responsibility, and silent companionship. And Laura understood that while the visit had been brief, its impact would linger far longer, shaping her thoughts, decisions, and perspective in ways subtle but meaningful. She thought about the ways life often hands us unexpected moments that feel small at first but prove transformative. And she realized that hosting Ethan had been a mirror, reflecting her own growth, resilience, and capacity to care without fear, to connect without crossing boundaries, to give and receive lessons without drama. And she felt gratitude for that clarity, for the way temporary connections could leave lasting marks on the heart. That night, Laura cleaned the kitchen slowly, methodically, not rushing, letting her mind wander over conversations, gestures, and small achievements from the weekend, noting how ordinary activities like preparing meals, tidying, or sitting through homework could become vessels for trust and understanding. And she recognized that these moments didn't need to be sensational or romantic to matter. They needed only authenticity, care, and attentiveness. Later, sitting with a cup of tea on the porch, Laura looked out at the quiet street, feeling a sense of closure paired with renewal, knowing she had honored her role as host, mentor, and friend in a way that was safe, ethical, and deeply human. And she smiled softly at the idea that life sometimes hands you clarity not through upheaval or passion, but through the gentle unfolding of ordinary moments that demand presence, attention, and empathy. In that stillness, she realized the weekend had reminded her of who she could be. Someone capable of making a difference quietly, without fanfare, without risk, and without compromising values. And that knowledge felt liberating, grounding, and profoundly hopeful. She thought about Ethan's calm maturity, the way he had navigated the weekend with curiosity, respect, and openness. And she recognized that his brief stay had offered her a lesson in observing growth, offering support, and letting human connection happen naturally, without forcing outcomes or blurring lines. As night deepened, Laura opened her laptop to revisit projects she had postponed, inspired by the focus and attentiveness she had witnessed in Ethan. Realizing that the weekend's lessons could translate into her work, her relationships, and her personal growth, teaching her to approach life with steadiness, patience, and care. Finally, as she prepared for bed, the house silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, Laura reflected on the simple truth that some moments arrive unannounced, quietly shifting perspective, deepening self-awareness, and reminding us that meaningful impact doesn't need drama. Romance or excitement can emerge from being present, offering care and honoring boundaries. And she fell asleep that night feeling not only relieved that the weekend had passed smoothly, but enriched, grounded, and more attuned to the value of small, deliberate acts of connection that leave lasting impressions on both giver and receiver.